4 hours. That's how long it takes for the human soul to go from complete hopelessness to the highest triumph. Today, we embark on a journey that lasted 500 days. This is the story of Captain Thomas Gale and his crew, whose ship was crushed by the ice of Antarctica. Get ready, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment, resilient, if you are ready to go this way to the end. Let's begin. The ice didn't attack us all at once. It was a slow, agonizing embrace. We had left South Georgia in December 2000 thinking we could reach the Antarctic continent within weeks. But the Weddell Sea had other plans. I remember the morning of January 19th. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in an hour. The floes, massive plates of ice the size of cities, began to grind against each other. The SS Endurance, a ship built of the strongest oak and pine, was nothing more than a toothpick in a giant's hand. Captain, the hull is weeping, my first mate Miller said. He didn't mean water, he meant the wood was crying out. A low rhythmic thud, screech, snap. It sounded like a living creature being slowly crushed. We weren't sailing anymore. We were passengers in a frozen desert, drifting wherever the current decided to take us. By May, the sun had given up. It dipped below the horizon for the last time, leaving us in a twilight that lasted 4 months. You don't know darkness until you've seen it in the Antarctic. It's a darkness you can feel on your skin, like a cold, wet clog. We turned the ship into a winter fortress. We built kennels on the ice for the 70 sled dogs. Their howling was the only music we had. Inside the ship, we tried to keep the ghosts away. We had university nights where the men gave lectures on everything from anatomy to classical music. We staged plays. We sang songs about London and warm beer. But under the laughter, there was the constant pressure. The ice was moving, tightening its grip. Every night I lay in my bunk, listening to the ice claws scratching at the bottom of the ship. Scritch, scratch, bang. It was the sound of a countdown. On October 27th, the countdown reached 0. I was in the chart room when the floorboards literally exploded upward. The pressure of the ice had forced the stern post up through the deck. Water poured into the hold, not as a stream, but as a flood. All hands, abandon ship, I shouted. The men moved with a terrifying silent precision. We had practiced this. We lowered the 3 lifeboats onto the ice. We threw down the remaining bags of biscuits, the tents, and the sleds. I was the last to leave. I stood on the tilted deck, looking at the wood that had been our only home for a year. The ship gave a final, massive groan, like a lung collapsing. As I jumped onto the ice, the main mast snapped with a sound like a lightning strike. "She's gone, Captain," Miller whispered, his breath a white cloud in the dark. "No," I replied, looking at the 27 men standing in the snow. "She's just wood. Our journey only begins now." The Endurance was gone. For weeks, its skeletal remains had haunted the horizon, a jagged silhouette of broken masts. Then, one afternoon, with a final, sickening gurgle, the ice spat it out and swallowed it whole. We were alone on a piece of ice 6 feet thick, floating over an abyss 3 miles deep. We called it Ocean Camp. It wasn't a camp, it was a stay of execution. "Captain, the men are starting to stare," Miller whispered to me during the 3rd week of the darkness. He was right. In the absence of work, the mind becomes an enemy. I saw it in their eyes, the Antarctic stare. A 1,000-yard gaze that sees through the snow and into a void where there is no home, no fire, no family. I knew I had to keep them busy, even if the tasks were meaningless. We spent hours scrubbing the floorboards of the lifeboats. We organized dog sled races. We weighed every gram of seal blubber as if it were gold. The sun had been gone for 3 months. The cold was so intense that if you spat, it hit the ice as a solid pebble. But the cold wasn't the danger, it was the movement. Beneath our feet, the great ice was breathing. One night, a sound like a cannon blast ripped through the center of our camp. I ran out of my tent, into the pitch black. The crack! It's under the galley, someone screamed. The ice floe had split in two. I saw one of the sailors, Holmes, still in his sleeping bag, sliding toward the widening gap of black, frigid water. I dived, grabbing him by the collar, just as the ice opened up like a giant mouth. That was the moment the reality hit us. The floor of our world was temporary. We weren't standing on land. We were standing on a raft that was slowly being eaten by the very ocean we were trying to escape. This is the part of a story that still haunts my dreams. By day 350, the seal meat was gone. The penguins had migrated. We were starving. I looked at the sled dogs. They were our friends, our loyal companions who had pulled our loads across the frozen wastes. But a leader's first duty is to his men. Wild, I said to our best marksman, do it quickly and make sure the men don't see. We ate the dogs. It was a silent meal. No one looked at each other. The meat was tough and tasted of heartbreak, but that protein gave us the strength to survive the final weeks of the winter. We were no longer explorers. We were ghosts fueled by the ghosts of our companions. On the 380th day, a sliver of gold appeared on the horizon. It lasted only minutes, but it was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. The sun had returned, but the sun brought a new terror. The ice began to soften. The floe that had been our home for nearly a year was now the size of a backyard. It was tilting, it was breaking. We could hear the roar of the open ocean just a few miles to the north. Prepare the boats, I commanded. We had 3 lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. They were small, wooden shells, never meant for the Drake Passage, the most violent stretch of water on the planet. Captain, Miller asked, looking at the churning, ice choked waves. What if we don't make the island? Then we will die as men who are moving, I replied. And that is better than dying as men who were waiting. On day 400, the floe beneath us finally shattered. We pushed the boats into the black water. Behind us, the ice closed up, erasing the place where we had lived for a year. The long dark was over. The ocean hell had begun. The transition was violent. One moment we were standing on a solid, albeit shrinking piece of ice. The next, we were tossed into the black, churning throat of the Southern Ocean. The 3 lifeboats, James Caird, Dudley Docker, and Stancomb Wills, looked like walnut shells in a boiling cauldron. Keep together, I screamed over the roar of the freezing spray. If we lose sight of each other, we are dead men. But the ocean had no intention of keeping us together. Huge blocks of ice, some as large as houses, were being hurled around by the swell. We had to row for our lives, navigating a labyrinth of grinding white giants. Every time the hull of the James Caird brushed against a floe, the wood shrieked. It was a race against the crushing weight of the sea. By the second night, a new enemy emerged. Not the cold, not the waves, but thirst. When we scrambled into the boats, we hadn't been able to take enough fresh water. The salt spray was everywhere. It coated our lips, our eyes, our throats. Don't drink the seawater, boys, Miller croaked, his voice barely a whisper. It'll steal your mind before it kills your body. I saw the men looking at the dark waves with a terrifying hunger. We began to suck on pieces of raw seal meat, trying to extract any moisture we could. Our tongues swelled until they filled our mouths. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. The men were no longer rowing with strength. They were moving by reflex, their eyes glazed, their bodies hunched against the relentless wind. Sleep was impossible. If you closed your eyes for more than a minute, the freezing water drenching the boat would pull you into hypothermia. We had to kick each other, slap each other, and sing cracked, tuneless songs to stay awake. On the fourth night, the hallucinations began. Captain, look, the lights of London, one of the sailors cried, pointing at the crest of a massive dark wave. Others saw phantom ships or heard the voices of their mothers calling from the fog. I had to hold the tiller for 18 hours straight, my hands frozen into the shape of the wood. I felt as though I was steering a boat of ghosts through the afterlife. The line between reality and the void had completely dissolved. On the 7th day, the mist cleared for a fleeting second. Land, Miller shrieked. It didn't look like land. It looked like a jagged black tooth jugging out of the white foam. Elephant Island. It was a desolate, ice-covered rock, but to us it was paradise. The landing was a nightmare of surf and rocks. The Stamcom whales nearly capsized, but we dragged the boats onto a narrow strip of shingle. As I stepped out of the boat, my legs collapsed. I couldn't stand. I crawled onto the dry stones and felt the earth, solid, unmoving earth, beneath my fingers for the first time in 497 days. Some of the men laughed hysterically. Others wept into the pebbles. We were alive, but as the sun set over the jagged cliffs of Elephant Island, the grim truth settled in. We were hundreds of miles from any shipping lane. No one was coming for us. We had escaped the ice, only to be imprisoned on a rock at the end of the world. I looked at my 27 men. They were broken. Their feet were black with frostbite. Their faces were raw from the salt, and their spirits were flickering out. "We can't stay here," I said to Miller that evening as we sheltered under the upturned lifeboats. "We have no choice, Captain," he replied. "The boats won't survive another week in this ocean." "One of them will," I said, looking at the James Caird. "I'm going to take 5 men. We're going to sail to South Georgia." Miller looked at me as if I were a madman. South Georgia was 800 miles away, across the most treacherous stretch of ocean on Earth, the Drake Passage. We would have to find a tiny speck of an island in 1,000 miles of gray chaos, using only a handheld sextant and the stars we might never see through the clouds. "It's a suicide mission, Tom," Miller whispered. "It's the only mission," I replied. "If I stay, we all die. If I go, at least you have a chance." On the morning of April 24th, the James Caird was ready. We had raised its gunwales with salvaged wood and covered the deck with a makeshift skin of frozen canvas. We loaded 500 kilograms of stones for ballast to keep us from flipping in the giant swells. I stood on the shingle and looked at the 22 men staying behind. I saw the fear in their eyes, masked by a thin veil of hope. "I will be back," I told them. It was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but it was the only thing they had to live on. As we pushed off, the men on the shore gave 3 thin, ragged cheers. The sound was swallowed by the roar of the surf almost instantly. We were 6 men in a 20-foot boat heading into the heart of the screaming 60s. For 16 days, we lived in a world that was vertical. The waves of the Drake Passage are not like waves anywhere else. They are mountain ranges of water, 60 feet high, moving at 30 miles an hour. We lived in a state of permanent saturation. Our sleeping bags were sodden, rotting messes of reindeer skin. Our skin broke out in painful salt boils. We took turns at the tiller, tied to the boat so we wouldn't be swept away. On the 10th night, I saw a line of white on the horizon. I thought it was a break in the clouds. "The sky is clearing," I shouted to Worsley. A moment later, I realized the horror. It wasn't the sky, it was the crest of a rogue wave, a white giant larger than anything we had ever seen. "For God's sake, hold on," I yelled. The wave hit us like a falling building. The boat was buried under tons of white water. For a few seconds, we were under the ocean, the weight of the sea crushing the air from our lungs. But the Caird was a stubborn soul. She rose from the depths, half full of water, but still afloat. We spent the next 5 hours bailing for our lives, our fingers frozen to the buckets. On the 14th day, through a gap in the fog, we saw it, the jagged, snow-capped peaks of South Georgia. We had done the impossible. Worsley had navigated us across 800 miles of chaos, using only 4 sightings of the sun in 2 weeks. But the ocean wasn't finished. A hurricane-force gale pinned us against the coast. We spent 9 hours fighting to keep from being smashed against the cliffs. When we finally landed in King Haakon Bay, we were so weak we had to crawl onto the sand. There was only one problem. The whaling stations and help were on the other side of the island. Between us and salvation lay a mountain range that had never been crossed, filled with glaciers and precipices that no human foot had ever touched. I chose Worsley and Crean to come with me. We had no mountain gear, no sleeping bags, no map. We took 50 feet of rope and a carpenter's adze to use as an ice axe. We put screws through the soles of our boots to give us grip on the ice. We climbed for 36 hours without stopping. We knew that if we sat down to rest, we would never wake up. At one point, we reached a dead end, a sheer drop of 1,000 feet. The sun was setting and the mist was closing in. We have to slide, I said. It's suicide, Worsley replied. If we stay here, we freeze, I said. To tied ourselves together, sat on the ice, and launched ourselves into the abyss. We slid 3,000 feet in seconds, a blur of white and adrenaline, until we hit a soft snowbank at the bottom. We were alive. We were closer. At 3 p.m. on May 20th, we heard a sound that made our hearts stop. A steam whistle, the afternoon whistle of the Stromness whaling station. We walked into the station looking like demons. We were black with blubber smoke. Our clothes were rags. Our hair was matted with salt. Two children saw us and ran away in terror. I walked into the manager's office. He looked at me, not recognizing the man he had seen 2 years ago. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. "My name is Shackleton," I said quietly. It took 3 attempts and 4 months to get past the pack ice to Elephant Island. Every day I spent on the rescue ship, I stared at the horizon, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. When the fourth ship, the Yelcho, finally approached the island, I counted the figures on the beach through my binoculars. 1, 5, 10, 20. Are they all there? The captain of the Yelcho asked. I couldn't speak. I just pointed. 22 men were standing on the shore, waving their shirts. They are all alive, I whispered. Every single one. We returned to a world that had been changed by war. The endurance was gone, lost to the deep, but its story became something else. It became the definitive proof that the human spirit does not have a breaking point, only a stretching point. We didn't reach the South Pole. We didn't claim the continent. But we found something far more valuable. We found that in the darkest night, in the coldest wind, and in the middle of a crushing sea, there is a light inside us that the ice cannot touch. Tick tock, tick tock. The rhythm of the world goes on, but for those of us who stood on the ice and watched the sun vanish, the rhythm is different now. It is a rhythm of gratitude, a rhythm of survival. You have just completed 500 days of the greatest journey in history. If you are hearing these words now, you are one of the few who have made it this far. This story is a reminder to each of us. No matter how big the waves in your life, you are stronger than them. Please subscribe if you want to see more epic dives like this, and leave a comment, "I am alive," so we know this story has touched your heart. Until the next horizon.